Namaskar. I stand here to welcome you all to this inaugural lecture today in the series of Young Parliamentarian lectures. Please join me to put your hands together to welcome our guest speaker, Mr. Varun Gandhi, to Pune and to PIC. Honorable MP, before I introduce the dignitaries on the dais, may I introduce you the gathering here today. In the gathering today, we have President of PIC, Dr. Mashilkar. We have trustees and members of PIC from all walks of life. We also have young and bright students of Pune's famed academic institutions, and the wider Punekars in general who would not want to miss such an opportunity to listen to someone like you on a topic that's so pertinent and so important. Very briefly, you know much about PIC, but to add for the benefit of some of those who are not yet PIC members and who have attended the program today, PIC is a think tank. It's a think tank where we organize various lectures, conferences, seminars, and workshops so that not just the members, but wider Punekars and those who visit Pune are able to benefit from it. Most of our programs are open for one and all. And most of the programs we highly encourage the younger students to come and participate in. There is a reason we are mentioning it so that you are able to take this message and spread it around so that in the future programs we have even bigger participation, not just of members, but all of you out there. I'll not take much time to talk about PIC here. I'll not take much time to talk about the lecture series because we have Dr. Padgaonkar who is chairing the session. It's his brainchild to start such a series. So what better than having Dr. Padgaonkar to introduce the guest speaker as well as introduce the lecture series. So without taking much time, may I invite Dr. Padgaonkar to please introduce us the speaker.
Good morning, everyone. We chose to start what we call in PIC a new vertical. That's to say a series of lectures by young members of Parliament. Some of them, of course, figure in the media, but many of them who do some very hard work in their own constituencies and in Parliament rarely get the kind of exposure in the media. So we thought this was one way of engaging with these young MPs. And I think we could not have begun on a more auspicious note than to get Varun Gandhi to inaugurate these series, because very fortuitous circumstances make it possible for us to listen to him. He, to begin with, belongs to a family which perhaps is the only one of its kind to have shaped the modern history of India. This is the fifth generation of the Nehru-Gandhi family, and he belongs to that party. I can think of only one similar family, but in a country which is not a democratic one, and that's North Korea. So we are going to leave that apart. But in a democracy, I think this is the fifth generation of a family which is deeply, deeply involved in shaping the history of our country. But that's not the only reason. Varun is a second-time member of Parliament in the Loksabha. He got elected in Philippines first, where he succeeded his mother, and his mother in turn in that same constituency succeeded him, because in the meantime, he had moved on to another constituency in UP Sudan. So this track record of being a two-time MP again is something which drew our attention to. Thirdly, he has been extremely active as a member of Parliament, both within Parliament as well as in his constituency, and the record is there for all to see. I mean, he's a member, a very active member in parliamentary committees. He's very actively involved also in spending the money that he gets for development work on education and health. He, in fact, has at one point renounced his salary as an MP to be able to provide succor to people who had suffered very grievously in a drought area. So there is this strong political side of him and this very strong social side of him. In addition, Varun has been, um, what should I say? I would like to call it an oxymoron, but he is a thinking politician. And one evidence that he is a thinking politician is that he is a prolific columnist. His writings appear in leading English and non-English daily newspapers and magazines. What is striking about these articles, and I happen to read some of them in English, is that they are extremely well researched and they cover a very large range of issues. And he will doubtless tell us a little bit more about this. But again, as I said, what strikes you is that they are perhaps a bit too academically oriented than is required from of what you expect from people like these. And of course, he does not begin every article by saying, the nation wants to know. So, which is a tremendous relief. But there's yet another side to him, which few know, but more and more people are beginning to appreciate, is that Varun is a published poet. He published his first book of poetry. He published his first book of poetry when he was barely 20. And he published again last year another book, and I shall, when I conclude this session, be able to give you just one bare glimpse of the quality of his work. But he published one last year, and what is truly amazing, at least certainly I was amazed, is that in the first 2-3 days of the publication of this volume of poems, it had sold more than 10,000 copies. This is a feat. So there is this, therefore, in him, there is a person who carries on his shoulders, which fortunately are very broad, on his shoulders he carries this extraordinary legacy of an extraordinary family. He is an accomplished politician. He's a scholar. He has a great social conscience. He's a poet. I don't think that the combination of these 5 factors are to be found very much in the rest of our country. And I think this is a remarkable feat. So, without much ado, I should tell you that I have been admiring him for a very long time for his work that he's done. I have huge differences with him, but which I shall not display right at the moment. But this much said, my real difference with him, and this is something I've been saying to him again and again, is that while he's active in Parliament, while he's active in his constituency, in his state, he ought to be a little more active in the electronic media. I think this is where today you get the kind of traction that you don't. But here is the miracle of it all, that though he is not a frequent, doesn't make a frequent appearance in TV debates, 2 new surveys that were done in UP in the past 40 odd days showed that if there is one leader in the country who in the eyes of public opinion is not just ahead, but street ahead of all the others, it is Varun Gandhi. I don't want to embarrass him, and I don't want to embarrass anyone else by citing who the number 2 and the number 3 are. But you can very well imagine who they are. So, Varun, over to you.
I'm delighted to be here, and it's always wonderful to be in Pune, a city which has been historically at the forefront of every major social, civil, political, cultural transformation that has ever taken place in our country. We are in the place today at this Pune International Center amongst great legends, Dr. Padgaonkar, Dr. Mashelkar, General Patankar, Mrs. Aga, and several others. These These are all people who have shaped India in their own way and will continue to do so for many decades to come. I have known Dr. Padgaonkar more as family than as the legend that he is. And so if I'm very bad today, he can give me a spanking afterwards. What I'd like to speak to you today about is the need for urgent political reform. And I'd like to cite before you certain examples globally and some in India about why the need for political reform is more urgent than ever and why, in fact, young people are demanding it in such an aggressive manner today. We live in an unequal world. It's a world which is going through a large amount of global, political, societal upheaval. This has been the case for some time now. But really, the one big issue, the one larger narrative that is the underpinning for all this is economic inequality, is financial exclusion. 1% of India owns 61% of Indian assets. That is an appallingly frightening statistic. 10% of India owns 89% of India, which means 90% of India is restricted to 11% of Indian wealth. Compare that, you don't need to compare it with Scandinavia, but even if you compare it with Thailand, it's a completely different story. The point is that this inequality that I'm talking about has been, to some extent, a catalyst for political reform. When you look at a gentleman like Bernie Sanders, who in modern times has sparked what many young people consider a revolution. When you look at Jeremy Corbyn, who from nowhere has taken the Labour Party by storm. He may not take it to victory, but he's certainly taken it by storm. What does it mean? Many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, socialism had almost become a dirty word in India. No longer. No longer. And why is this? It's because in Pune, we have, 7 billionaires living in Pune? 7 or 9 or 11 by different Forbes and Fortune estimates. And yet within 200 kilometers of Pune, in the last 4 years, we've had 340 farmer suicides. The airport, which per capita has the largest amount of private jets in India, is Pune. It's also the district with the second most farmer suicides outside of Vidarbha in Maharashtra. So what does this really mean? It means that young people are not accepting this as a status quo and in their narrative want to fight back in some manner of speaking. Let's look at what's happening globally. Look at Brazil. Brazil has had almost 6 years of inflation, hyperinflation. They've had 10 years of recession. But the interesting statistic that I saw was that 64% of the 594 members of parliament in Brazil, 64% were being indicted for corruption. Not 1%, not even 10%, not 20%. 64% were being investigated for corruption. Most of them belong to a party which ironically is called the Workers' Party. And President Dilma Rousseff had to lose her job, embarrassingly, in the Petrobras scandal, the $5.3 billion scandal that took place, which engulfed the entire country and its polity. Let's look at what's happening in America. The Koch brothers, spelled Koch, who are two of the richest people in America, have recently in an interview said they'll spend $1 billion in this election cycle to try and get their candidate, in this case, Mr. Trump, elected to the president's chair. The point is, does an unlimited money, look at the super PACs, the political action committees in America, which allow you legitimately to raise an unlimited amount of money from individuals, from corporations, even from foreign interests, actually. And so how is that going to play out in the future? Because if money is the engine that drives this polity or this system, then is money also the engine that perpetuates this inequality? I think this needs to be asked. Because does unlimited amounts of money therefore buy you unlimited influence? Does it buy you unlimited power? I don't know, but these questions are worth asking. Because if you are elected to power, in America, for instance, backed by lobbyists, then I suppose by implication, would you be more loyal to the electorate, or would you be more loyal to those lobbyists and the selected few that had put you in that chair? An interesting statistic which a lot of people don't know is that the poorest 20% of America before the election of President Obama voted on an average at 16%. So it is never the case in Western countries that poor people vote in droves. In fact, they are the least connected to the political system, which parties like the Republican parties thrive on. And it's President Obama that actually inverted this for racial reasons somewhat, but still, the point is it ended up being fairer. When we look at the Indian campaign finance system, because campaign finance is a big part of political reform. Prime Minister Vajpayee said every politician in India starts his election with a lie. And that lie is how much money you said you're going to spend in your elections. I, of course, am the only truthful one who fought the elections, as you well know. But other than me, I would say, a lot of the people there haven't quite been so honest. But let's be honest. The fact is that, even in India, what are the rules? The rules are very bizarre. So one rule is that an individual's expenditure in an election is capped, but parties as political entities can spend unlimited amounts. That's very strange. So I can spend only, say, 50 lakhs to get elected, but the BJP can spend 50 crores on getting me elected. That doesn't seem to make any sense to me. And that has to change. The other thing is that corporations can only give so much, but individuals can give unlimited amounts, which also is sort of adds to the unevenness of it. The Philippines did something very interesting. What they did was, they said, no foreign donors, no corporate donors, no individual donors, and no anonymous donors. You can have 5 donors, but you will put them on the Election Commission website and your own website, just 5, and all of them need to give a cumulative amount of $100,000. A lot of people will still try and obstruct that system. The point is, the system makes it harder to be obstructive, to be corrupt. New Mexico in America did the same thing, roughly. They encouraged more people to spend their own money by banning all kinds of contributions. In Australia and Germany, for instance, they've said that whoever gets 5% of the vote in the last election is entitled to full public subsidization of their campaign, public funding of their campaign. In America, the most interesting state, one of the smallest states, and one of the states with the largest French influence, I don't know if that made it so, Maine is a state where they have done something very interesting, where they've said that they made a Maine Clean Election Act. And they said that, yes, we will give you public spending for your elections. However, you need to get, for governor, 15,000 signatures of people that will give you $10 each. So what they said is that if you show us that you have genuine public support and people that are invested in your campaign and believe in you, we will then match those contributions and ensure that you don't put in any of your money. And it's 3,200 for a congressman, it's 7,000 people for a senator, and so on and so forth. So I thought that this was interesting. And it also has affected real financial reform. Norway, which according to the World Corruption Perceptions Index is the 5th most honest country in the world, has done something very different. They've said, we will not regulate your spending. You can spend as much as you want. However, the election cycle end to end will be only 15 days. And political advertising is banned on TV, on radio, in the papers, and rallies of more than 5,000 people are banned. So what they've in fact done is they've regulated the market for that money. They've said spend as much as you want, but there's nowhere to spend it. So the fact is that what they've done is, in doing so, they have made politicians go door to door to actually build relationships with their voters and be more responsible and more responsive. So I thought that was a very interesting idea. Now the fact is that in India, what have we done? We've got an election commission in India. The fact is that the election commission in India is largely toothless. There was a reason for this. Initially, when institutions were getting made, there was a real threat that institutions would get too powerful for the system. And when our Constituent Assembly sat, when Panditji sat as the first Prime Minister, our democracy was very delicate. It was in its nascent stages. And world democracies were very delicate. So there was a major threat of dictatorship. There was a major threat that people or institutions or armies could get too powerful for their nation states. So they purposely created these infant institutions to not be as perhaps pervasive as they could have been. The thing is that what gets me about the Election Commission is that I want to ask all of you a question. How many auditors do you think the Election Commission of India has? How many auditors do you think it has? Just give me a wild guess. It has 2. No, this is real. It has 2 auditors. On a good year, they sometimes get 2 more. Now tell me one thing. With 2 auditors, or perhaps 4, can you audit hundreds of thousands of papers given to you by a political party on their expenditure? You can't. I can't. You know? The point is that why don't we arm and fortify our institutions financially. We've got 2 auditors. So how did I find this out? Because I was researching the BSP case before I had to speak here yesterday. And it's an amazing case. You must look at it. So what's the case? The BSP, ostensibly a party of the poorest sections and marginal sections of society, very good notion, says that we have collected 440 crore rupees. Is the richest party in India of the poorest people, naturally. And it says we've collected 440 crore rupees. People say, great. How have you collected it? And they say, we have collected it because people have come and given 1 rupee and 2 rupees and 5 rupees and 10 rupees. So by that notion, the BSP should have got 30-40 crore votes also across the country. But sadly, it has not performed, I suppose, to its contributors' expectations. But what has happened is that they were asked that, can you tell us who these people are? They said, I'm sorry, we have no idea, because our people are completely illiterate, so they can't sign their name. And if we tell them to put a thumbprint, they will think that it could be misused in the future. So nobody is willing to put a thumbprint. So you've got 440 crores of unaccounted money, and the truth is that nobody can do anything about it. That is money lying in their coffers. So whether they build swimming pools and farmhouses with that money or buy Ferraris with that money, that's their money. I mean, that's theirs to do with what they please. So the fact is that we've got to give the Election Commission more teeth. Argentina has 400 auditors in their Election Commission. 400. And they've created a separate secretariat for the Election Commission. They have a minister specially in charge of their Election Commission. The Election Commission doesn't report to the minister. They work together on election campaign finance reform, on electoral reform, on such and such and such. You know, we have really not done enough. Let's look at tackling the drawbacks of coalition politics. A lot of people feel that this is an Indian phenomenon, but it is really not. It has happened the world over. It's happened more and more and more. Italy has suffered 6 or 7 governments in the last 15 years. And recently, Prime Minister Matteo Renzi said that we must have a new constitution and we must have a new referendum on a new format of governance. So for the first time, Italy has got a proportional representation system. So parties that don't get 3% of the vote nationally don't get a single seat in parliament. We also have to congratulate Italy because it's the first country that has officially mandated 40% of parliamentary seats for women, which I think is great, and we need to support that. Interestingly, the Indian attempt to give women's representation has been lying, I think, for 3 decades now, and will no doubt lie for some more. But the point is that, you know, we saw examples of this. When you saw the civil nuclear deal in 2008, I think, we saw open horse trading on the floor of the lower house of parliament, of the Loksabha, which I wasn't in parliament then. It was very shameful for me to watch. I think I was abroad and I was watching and people said, what is this? You know, why are MPs beating each other up on parliament? And I said, this is the way Indians show affection. I left that room slowly after that. But in any case, the point I'm trying to make is that we, as a country, need to look at proportional representation very seriously. 22 out of 28 countries in the EU have proportional representation. Poland, Germany have a 5% threshold, so does New Zealand. Turkey went a little majoritarian. Turkey, I think, wanted to get the Kurds out of parliament largely. So they said that we'll have a 10% system, where if you don't get 10% of the votes in the country, you can't even get one seat in parliament. Unfortunately, under the new muscular leadership of President Erdogan, they are now increasing, or they've mandated to increase by next year it to 20%, which I think is wrong and majoritarian and very dangerous. Because what that means is a party that gets the support of 19% of Turks doesn't have even one seat in parliament. And that, I think, is a broken system. But I definitely would like to advocate for a proportional representation system in India. I think it would be more representative. I think this first past the post system is terribly broken, and I'm going to talk about how it is so. So in Jharkhand, in the election of 2009, an astonishing statistic is that 96% of the winners, 96% of the winners in the Jharkhand 2009 assembly election had less than 30% of the vote. 96% of winners. And Shri Chandrasekhar Dubey became an MLA with just under 10% of the vote. That is incredible, that a man has become an MLA with not 10% of the vote, because 11 people fought and they all did relatively equally. Go figure. I mean, you've got Mr. Ravneet Singh Bittu, who's an MP with me in this Loksabha, who's got, I think, 24% of the vote, which is, questionable. See, my point is that when we look at this first past the post system, how representative is it? How many people in India have won with over 50% of the vote? Not 20% of people. So the fact is that if somebody loses the election by 1%, when I became an MP for the second time, the first thing I did was to call up the other people that fought against me. Sanjay Singh ji of the Congress, this Pandey from BSP, etc. And I called them and I said, look, at one of your houses, let's have a meeting, not at my place there. And I'll come to one of your houses, because all four of us have fought the election. One of us has won. It could have been any of us that had won. Let's sit together and let's draw up a roadmap for this constituency together, because all of you represent significant interests of this constituency. So is it possible that we can work together and really incorporate the best of each other's ideas to take this constituency forward? None of them returned my calls, so that is what it is. How do we increase political accountability? There was a case in 2013, Lily Thomas versus Union of India, which said that any person who's convicted of a crime and given a 2-year imprisonment in India is immediately disqualified and not allowed to fight for election again. Mrs. Aga will know that immediately the representation of people's Second Amendment and validation was brought in to crush this case, so that MPs who were convicted of the most heinous crimes could fight elections as long as they were alive. Luckily for India, this country is blessed by, by fortune. The fodder scam verdict came at the same time, and therefore government had to buck under public pressure, and then that went out of the window, and today we have such a law which is necessary. Let's talk about right to recall. So England has a very effective right to recall, so does Switzerland. They're a little different. So England's right to recall is a little gentler. It says that if you've got a custodial sentence of 12 months, a right to recall petition can be admitted if it's got 10% of signatures of the total constituents. Switzerland has a blanket right to recall. So Switzerland's is that anybody at any time, if you get 20% of the total voters in that area to say this MP should be recalled, he will be recalled and there will be a runoff. One would assume that if you put more power into the hands of voters, they might behave erratically. How many people from Switzerland have been recalled till now? One. That's it. Only one runoff has happened. So which means as politicians, we actually need to trust our voters more, empower them more, and invest more energy in making them stronger. And in turn, they as a bulwark will strengthen the system further. See, because my thinking is if people have the right to elect, they should have the right to recall, quite simply. Argentina did something very interesting in electoral reform. So President Mauricio Macri said they started a campaign called Cambiemos, which is let's change, I think that is in Spanish. And what they did was something very interesting, which is they said not only will we have compulsory presidential debates, but we will have compulsory gubernatorial debates, compulsory senatorial debates, compulsory debates even for district councillors, which will all be shown on television for the whole nation to see. And they mandated 3 hours on their state television. Now, what that did was they created a list of 20 subjects: labor reform, environmental reform, urbanization, rural empowerment, etc. And every representative from a councillor to the president of Argentina was grilled on those things. I was saying this to Honorable Dr. Mashelkar before we came in. I said, do we really know in India what anybody stands for? There was a point in India where we did know what our leaders stood for. We knew that Rajaji was right of the center. We knew that Purushottam Das Tandon was right of the center. We knew that Nehru was left of center. We knew that Chittaranjan Das was left of center. We don't know that today. I mean, do you know, for instance, what the foreign minister's view on labor reform is? You do not. Do you know what your chief minister's view on solar power is? Or foreign affairs with China is? Perhaps you may not. So the point is that why don't we know? Don't we have a right to know as a citizenry, as an electorate, what our leaders think, what they stand for? And only with a fully informed decision can we really be an empowered citizenry. So what I think should really happen is there must be prime ministerial debates in India. There must be chief ministerial debates. I mean, America has thrown up such scholarly gems as president like George W. Bush. But even a great scholar like George W. Bush had to go through that grueling grind of 8 months of 9 debates to secure the Republican nomination and 4 debates against his opponent, on which he was grilled on all and sundry, on defense, on foreign affairs, on the economy, on the environment, etc., etc. So even he came out of that knowing a little something about a little something. So my point is that I'm glad he's not the president, because I would probably be shot outside this hall. But my point is very simple, that you see, I write a lot. And the reason that I write is because as I write, so I learn. When I start, I've written an article which should come out in the Hindu on Monday on how muscular nationalism and enlightened self-interest is damaging multilateralism and is going to ultimately end supranational organizations, or at least, compromise their original goals. I didn't know anything about the Treaty of Westphalia, etc. before I started, but you learn. I've written an article on the Dalit issue for the Hindustan Times, which should come out later this week. And it's then that I started realizing how important it is for a non-Dalit, privileged young member of society to be fiercely agitated about giving people who have had and suffered these historical wrongs, giving them a large part of what is really their right. But before I started researching this, so my point, coming back to political reforms, is if we don't have informed leaders, we will not have informed decision making. If we don't have informed decision making, we will not have informed policy. If we don't have informed policy, we'll not have informed institutions. If our institutions are not informed, this country will have no future. So now let's come to inclusive politics. So how can we make politics more inclusive, and what are the ideas, and what are the different kinds of inclusion? Singapore has a very interesting idea. So President Lee Kuan Yew, who was otherwise quite a tough guy, said that I don't want this country to be majoritarian. And yet he didn't want sections of Singapore to ghettoize. So what he did was they put an equal amount of Chinese people in every constituency. But the result of that was no Malay, no Indian, no Tamil could ever get elected as an MP. So what they did was they created 13 GRCs, group representative constituencies, which basically were that there are 6 people on every list. All 6 people are MPs. All 6 people fight from roughly 7 or 8, what we would here call Loksabha constituencies. But the face of it and the head of that list is a minority. So almost all the minorities that are MPs in Singapore are now minorities from these GRCs. So why can't we have these in India? It would give larger representation. For instance, I have Parsi blood in me. Can a Parsi ever become a Lok Sabha MP in India? I don't know, it's fairly tough, right? My grandfather was an MP from Raebareli, but I don't think he could be one today. So the point is that at the end of the day, can we have these GRCs? Can we in fact use these group representative constituencies to make India more meritocratic? For instance, the constituencies of Bhadoi, Banaras, Mirzapur, Allahabad, can that become a weaver's constituency? Right? Because you never have a genuine weaver coming to parliament, for God's sake. Can we have people who are working, can we have, for instance, fishermen from coastal constituencies, real fishermen, real farmers from Western UP, Haryana, people who actually from Punjab, So can we have GRCs which have as their head in the lower house, not in the upper house, not nominated, traders, artisans, farmers, professors, educationists, scientists, who can actually nurture those fields in those areas? I think we have to think beyond the box. When we talk about increasing public participation in policy and governance, what does it mean? We all know that in India, politics is very elitist. It is in fact elitist in most poor countries of the world. And we all know that decentralization has to be substantive. But how can decentralization be substantive in a country where only 18 out of 100 people are on the internet, where information dissemination is so poor? Sweden has 99 people out of 100 on the internet. I mean, really comparing with Sweden is not the best. It doesn't make you feel so good. But my point is that if we have to take the electorate closer to politics, if we have to expand and make people participate more in the public process, we need to expand the use of the internet. We need to give people more information. We need to give them a certain amount of say. In Morocco in 2011, the citizens took to the streets against the rule of King Mohammed VI, I think it is. And they said that this is not a genuine constitutional monarchy. We want a new constitution. And I think King Mohammed VI didn't want what happened next door to poor Gaddafi and all to happen to him. So I think he went for constitutional reform. It was very interesting. They gave it, in fact, to an NGO called GovRight. And GovRight had a website, mostly francophone, so called reform.ma, reform with an E, which got 200,000 recommendations in 2 months. 200,000 recommendations in 2 months to collect the opinions on average Moroccan citizens on what the new constitution should be. Interestingly, 2 months after the recommendations were closed, the new constitution was rolled out. 48% of suggestions given on this website were incorporated in the new constitution. And what ended up happening was there was a referendum to okay the constitution, and 98% of people okayed the referendum. So what that means is, if you reach out to the people will reach out back to you. We need to work more on issues like this. In fact, the same organization introduced a new online initiative in Morocco called Legislation Lab, where people can contribute and amend existing legislations, whereby they can give suggestions. And 16 legislations have already been amended. For instance, in Germany, we had 2 bodies completely dedicated to civic management, the Bundestag Committee and the Enquete Commission, which's only job was wide public consultation on public policy in every state. And in a big state called Rhineland-Pfalz, they had public consultations on just healthcare. And they gave 180 suggestions, and all 180 suggestions by the Bundestag committee were implemented. They were basic suggestions, but for instance, keeping clinics open on Sunday for a little longer because a lot of people didn't have time throughout the week to go and get themselves checked up, etc. But my point is, we have to start listening more. In South Africa, any citizen can go and attend any parliamentary committee. I didn't know this. I thought it was fascinating. 2 days ago, I was at a Foreign Affairs Committee. The first thing my president, Dr. Tharoor, said is everything that is said in this committee is sacrosanct. You cannot repeat it outside. It is completely for us. It is not for public consumption. Frankly, there was nothing discussed in that committee that would even interest anybody sitting here. But he said it as part of parliamentary conduct. But I find it fascinating that in South Africa, not only can you go and parliamentary committees are open to the public, but you can actually give written and oral suggestions right there, and lots of times they have been taken. We talk about e-petitions. So Latvia has had a very interesting thing happen. They made a website, young people made a website, change.org made a website called Mana Balss, which means my voice in Latvian. And what it was they said, if we get 10,000 or 20,000 signatures, can there be a parliamentary debate on that? So the Prime Minister thought, I guess it was a childish prank, and he said, I'll go you one better. If you have 200,000 signatures, 250,000, I'll make it law. And 4 laws have been made in Latvia by young people through Mana Balss. And the thing is, it becomes law, it has to be passed in parliament, because America started something similar called We the People, where they didn't, of course, make it law, but they said, if you have a threshold signature of 15,000, the Congress will discuss it. But people started pranking, and they started putting forward 15,000 things for suggestions, like dwarfs should only dress in yellow, etc., etc. So then they increased it to 200,000 signatures. So anyway, young people will be young people. So, and then lastly, I want to talk about youth participation in political reform. So Jordan is a country that we don't hear a lot about recently for very good things, but Jordan has done something incredible. Jordan has made a ministry called the Ministry for Political Development. And what the ministry is this. The ministry has a very large staff. It goes to every block of Jordan. It interviews thousands and thousands of young people that want to be interviewed. It then makes recommendations based on the young person's ideological persuasion, his achievements, his dreams for the country, his thoughts, his vision. It writes his name, his age, his achievements, and it gives these recommendations to the political parties, saying, I met Abid Hussain, he was a very brilliant young man, he wants to do this, he has already done this, these are his dreams, he likes your party. Why don't you introduce him as not just a member of your party, but give him a post in your district council? And incredibly, 11% of members of parliament in the new parliament came from the Ministry of Political Development. I thought this was an amazing thing that happened. So why can't we do it in India? Why can't we go out there? And I know what some of you may say, that how can we crowdsource leadership? Why not? Why not? Is the leadership that we have now so exemplary that we cannot do better? I mean, let's be honest, right? Why can't we get young people from middle-class backgrounds, from non-privileged backgrounds, based on their vision? We don't have to start them off as members of parliament. Maybe they can be started off in the organization. Maybe they can be started off in councillor elections, or in whatever capacity, maybe as Gram Pradhans, maybe as BDC members, maybe as Zilla Parishad elections. My point is that we need new systems of getting new blood into the system. Until we do that, it'll always be a broken polity. So Bolivia did something very interesting as well. What they did was, Bolivia has a national secretariat for public participation in politics, which I thought was very interesting. And the Bolivian Jubilee in the year 2000 involved more than 4,000 individuals and 800 NGOs over 9 states in Bolivia working on poverty reduction. And they took their suggestions and they made working groups in each state. And according to the World Bank Global Poverty Working Group, because of the Bolivian Jubilee and of this public consultation and public participation, there has been a 30% reduction in the poverty headcount in Bolivia from the years 2002 to the years 2012, which I thought was a great thing. So if we can just listen to our people, the solutions are right before our eyes. Sierra Leone, not a country we hear of for the best reasons always, war-torn country, started a National Youth Commission Act as early as 2009. What does the Youth Commission Act do? It says every member of Congress, of Parliament, and every member of Legislative Assembly has to have lists of 20 young people working with them, unpaid, but those 20 young people's objections and their participation, their suggestions will be written down and sent to the government once a week. This goes right down to a councillor or a village headman, a pradhan. The Integrated National Public Services Survey done last year in Sierra Leone said that of 90% of respondents they spoke to, 90% had heard of their local councillor's name, 65% had talked to them on various issues, and 52% had been invited to participate in larger discussions, with 33% saying that what they said had affected the way in which their local MLA or MP had really come forward. I want to end by talking about the Indian scenario. We made the RTI. RTI was a fabulous piece of legislation. It really took this country forward in many, many ways. But what has happened with RTI? And we look at the successes of RTI, right? We look at Yoganand Acharya and Simpreet Singh uncovered what is now known as the Adarsh War Widows scam in Bombay. We look at lots of people, but I'll give you a few other examples. Jawaharlal Tiwari, a 60-year-old man from Sahibganj district in Bihar, worked on exposing corruption in the distribution of flood relief money. He was found with his head cut off 5 kilometers from his village. Guru Prasad from Bahraich district, not too far from where I was an MP, sat on dharna against the misappropriation of village level funds at his block. Again, shot dead 1 week later. You know, which is the state with the largest amount of RTI activists in India? Do you know which state it is? It's the state in which I'm speaking in today, which is a wonderful thing. Now I ask you another question. Do you know the state with the largest amount of RTI activists killed in India? Maharashtra. So the point is that if you're going to incentivize people to come and fight for the truth, then you have to have this long trail of blood left behind. Shaila Masood, Satish Shetty, Amit Jethwa, Kameshwar Yadav, the list is endless. You have to have people come out without any fear. And so lastly, I just want to say that what is the essence of democracy? Is when governments, systems ask individuals to renounce some of their sovereignty to their trusted representatives, right? But the fact is that when we look today at our system, it's not so much renunciation of sovereignty as much as requisition. And this is sad because we see representatives treated like rulers. I mean, the first thing I told people when I became an MP from this new area is I said, please don't touch my feet. It is wrong. It's poisonous. Shake my hand. And they said, how can we shake your hand? I mean, that's against custom. And I said, why? I'm as old as your son. And then what did I see happening? that every village I went to, slowly, slowly, the elderly people would still bow, but all the young people would shake my hand very proudly. So if we instill in our citizenry a sense of not just duty, but self-respect, honor, us as public representatives are not the solution. In fact, we're part of the problem. The truth of the matter is that unless you have an empowered citizenry, unless you have an empowered, ideated citizenry, unless you have citizenry which is in the middle of a continuous information exchange, unless you have a citizenry that can challenge its leadership at any given point in time, we will remain what we are, a civilization that has gone from medievalism to postmodernism without bothering to create anything in between. And I was in Africa recently, and I heard a proverb, and it said, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, let's go together. And I want to end by saying that we have to go far and we have to walk together. Thank you for having me.
Wow, amazing. How interesting and how insightful. Before we request Dr. Padgaonkar to give his comments, maybe if it's okay, we'll take a couple of questions. Sure. We'll pass on a mic there. It's okay? All right, please. So if you could please raise your hand.
Is Mr. Varun Gandhi ready for CM debate of UP?
You know, the thing is that when you enter politics, the worst thing to do is to work towards a particular position or a particular goal, because you'll always be miserable. The best thing to do, you know, what gives me the most pleasure, Dr. Padgaonkar said that he talked about in brief part of the work I was doing with farmers. I just want to take 2 minutes of your time. I started this in 2011, I think. No, 2014, sorry. And we said, whatever money I have as an MP, I think we had 70, 80 lakhs by that time, we'll distribute it amongst those farmers, families who've committed suicide. So we did that. But I found it very limited. So I said, how can we make this a movement? So what did we do? We looked at SECC data, NSSO data, collated it with local banks, collated it with the local administration. And what we did was we said, okay, I'll come once and I'll request the rich people of the area, the strong people of the area, that if I can give 5 lakhs, why can't you give 5,000 or 10,000? And I found people said, look, if there are no questionable intermediaries, we're willing to give even more. But we won't give it in the name of some NGO where we don't know what's happening with the money. So I said, no, you give it in the hands of the person. So when we started looking at not those people who had killed themselves, but the people on the brink of doing so, we got lists of 200, 250 persons per area. And we went forward and we asked people to contribute. And where we were helping 5, 7, 8 people per district, suddenly those people came on our stage. They gave those checks in the hands of those poor people because they knew it was going in their hands. And they got very good publicity for doing so locally. So it was a win-win situation. And we started helping 100 people at a time. So it's those kind of works that drive me. Coming here, speaking before all of you, I hope that I've lit some kind of diya somewhere in somebody's mind. You know, this is the work that drives you and that must drive you as a human being. The rest is all irrelevant.
Okay.
So once once a prime minister said, we know what to do, but what we don't know is how to get re-elected after doing. So how shall we strike a balance between the interest of politicians and the interest of commons?
See, I think it's an excellent question, and I want to congratulate you for asking it. I think the answers are very simple, which is that you have to arrive at an opportunity cost. And I think that there is a balance. Sometimes you may veer towards populism, but it cannot be putting so much fertilizer into the land that the land becomes arid and useless after a while. So I think there is some aspect of politics that's about getting re-elected, but there is a large aspect about politics which is about influencing policy, influencing debate, influencing the narrative, and getting things done. And I'll tell you one thing from my personal experience. If you do good for people, even sometimes if they have to swallow a bitter pill, they will. I'll give you an example. In my constituency, I launched a campaign. People were forever coming to me and they were saying, does everybody understand Hindi? Yeah. Mostly. So people were coming to me, they would say, ye sadak theek se nahi bani, ye pul theek se nahi bana. So I would say, okay, those villages that live on the sides of these of roads getting constructed, in shifts of 2 hours each, will 2 young people stand there and see the contractors doing good work? Will you do it? And people said yes, and they did a fantastic job. So if you involve people, even if they had to stand there in the sun for 2, 3, 4 hours, they were willing to do it because they had my phone number. They knew they could call me and say, this contractor is cheating, he's putting bad material, and we would act against them. So I think the answer is that we started another initiative. In UP, there's this habit, even in Delhi, of spitting on the roads. Actually, I think everywhere in India. And I just told those people, I said, look, this is your country. You're not a guest here. Will you spit inside your own house? You won't. So why are you spitting on the road? And we just went hammering this message in all our meetings. And I found now that wherever I go, young people say कि भाई साहब हमने वो सब करना बंद कर दिया है. And now my next step is to get them to stop chewing tobacco and this thing, which causes that awful phlegm that needs to come out. But the point is that so the answer to your question is yes, inevitably there is an aspect of getting re-elected. But if you demonstrate value to the voter, long term and short term, you will get re-elected. Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Quick question. One is that you mentioned about crowdsourcing of new leaders.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to tell you that this innovative city has done that all across Maharashtra in the last 1 year from students across the colleges. They have created student MLAs and ministers and they have found some excellent solutions. So hopefully these people will be elected or selected. The question is, you mentioned about the reforms and the need for reforms and made a wonderful case. Yet there were 3 chief election commissioners, starting with Session, Mr. Lingdon, to some extent Narayan Swamy, have been very effective in spite of all the limitations that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Any comments?
I mean, I want to congratulate what you said and add value to that. And Maharashtra is traditionally an extremely progressive state with an extremely liberal and forward-thinking people. So if change were to happen, it would happen here. I think TN Session did a great job. I'm not sure. See, it is one man that changes a system. I'll give you an example. To be honest, had any of us heard who the CAG was before Vinod Rai? No. Had any of us heard who CEC was before Mr. Seshan. So individuals make big changes. The only answer to that is that you need systemic change as well. So individuals can come in and play their part, but to solidify change, you need the government to back it.
Why does your party allow the great economic agenda to keep getting hijacked? There have been instances which all
Yeah,
of
I
us.
got the question because we
We're
just
not
have to go quickly. I will answer you.
Second,
Yeah,
just,
please.
just,
Yeah.
just
The question is, how serious politicians are about financial literacy? Because world over, government budgets are all driven by deficits.
Very well.
Financial
On my-
efficiency,
Look, please.
Financial literacy.
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 Yeah.
Okay, can I please go on the left where my heart lies?
Sir, I think we will only take one or two more because they're like.
Okay, two more. Yes, please.
Okay. Recently, a lot of work has been done in the parliament,
Yes, sir.
and I think the GST example was also there, where all parties came together.
Yeah.
Are you seeing a change in the pattern now?
Okay,
Very
let's start.
good question.
Let's start with
Just one last question.
One last one at the end. Yes, please.
Yes, ma'am.
I have an off the politics question. How was it like being brought up by a single mom? And what are the traits that you have, sort of inherited from her and
I
from
think
your
that was
dad's
the
side?
best question of the
Okay.
morning. I'll just answer these to start with. So, yeah. Sorry, what was it? Just in brief? Yeah, okay. So, I think that parties increasingly are aware that voters want issue-based politics. And I think every party has certain people that tend to speak off the cuff more than they should. And I think that our democracy is maturing, and increasingly you're finding these people getting alienated or treated as fringe. I think that I'm quite optimistic in terms of the emerging political narrative. And so I believe that if you look at the Prime Minister's commitment, for instance, on GST or on several things, he has displayed courage on backing, reform. And so I think that as time goes on, hopefully, the former will take precedence. On financial literacy, I'm not quite sure I understand your question. So obviously, I'm not financially literate too. But I think that it's imperative, really, what you said, that a lot of people don't understand the who's and what's and ifs of financial decisions and of the financial roadmap going forward. And I think that to tie this into a larger narrative, I think as members of parliament, it would be a good idea if all of us were given fields of interest particular to us and given more research assistance so that we could really become experts in certain things rather than being jack of all trades. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Yeah. So as I said to the lady, I think that I'm seeing, it's to tie in what the young gentleman said at the back. You see, there's a certain amount of playing to the gallery that will happen no matter who's in power and who's in opposition. But I think that there's a certain public pressure put by people such as yourself on Facebook, on Twitter, on public discourses on television. I never go on television, but I watch a lot of television, so I know how important it is. But I read 7 or 8 papers a day. And so I know, sometimes I even look at the letters to the editor, which I think are very important. And I think that people like you should insist that where national interest is there, political parties need to set aside their differences, and in you will lie the answer that politicians will then bow in front of. The last question was about being raised by a single mother. I think that women extraordinary beings because they contain within them a strength that I don't see in men such as myself. And I think that from my mother, I have learned to not be fearful. And the older you grow, the more inadvertently you become your parents. So I think that I'm getting better with age, hopefully, and more sensible. And I think that from my mother, I've learned a certain amount of kindness and a certain amount of sensitivity, and also a belief that God lies in being good. It doesn't lie just in practice divinity. But most of all, what I feel that I've learned being brought up by not just one single woman. You know, I have three women in my life, my mother, my nani, and my masi. And my wife has three women in her life, her mother, her masi, and her first cousin. So really there are very few men around me. And I think that the one takeaway from that, the one gift for that, I would think is women are very resilient in the face of adversity. They're patient, they're stronger, and they're wiser. And so I don't know if I've learned that through osmosis, but I've certainly tried to inculcate some of those qualities in myself through observation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now we request Dr. Padgavkar, the chairperson, to give his concluding remarks. So,
Well, I'm going to cut down my speech because I think everyone looks hungry. I'm not going to give you a summary of what Varun has said because I hope that very soon a transcript will be made available and put on the website of the Pune International Center. In fact, with the permission of our president, I'd go one step ahead and say perhaps this transcript could be the basis of one of our idea forums that we've launched with Amit Paranspe. We'll take them around, we'll get inputs from whoever, and then try and structure all of it and put it out as a paper. What I'd like to say is that, this issue of electoral or political reforms, this has been going on for a long, long time. We've had some excellent commissions, but as with all commissions reports, they've been gathering dust. I speak with some personal experience. I did a report around 5 years ago, and some dust was blown off that report yesterday, I understand. But Sarkaria and Venkacharaya were the two people who gave excellent reports on the subject. But where Varun is, this was done a long, long time ago. And obviously much has changed in the past 18, 20 years since those reports were made. Particularly, I think, the growing importance of the social media, the heightened sense of democracy that has seeped down. I think the greater assertiveness that's happening. And I find that this is where, if I'll ask him over lunch, but I get the impression that across the country, the newer modes of dissent that are coming up, we are moving away from, let us say, the narratives of entitlement to the narratives of empowerment. And I think this kind of new assertiveness that you find, particularly among the young and across the board, all kinds of political people, I think that's something that need to be reckoned with. So what we are going to do is a transcript will be given to you. You go through it. We'll put it out on our idea platform. We get across the country, we are going to get responses to it. We shall then synthesize all of it, give it a certain structure, and then make it known again as a PIC report. So that's as far as this is concerned, but I'm very happy that he has given us references to good practices from absolutely every continent in the world, whether it is Latin America, North America, Europe, even Great Britain, which I no longer include in Europe, Africa, the Arab world, and so on and so forth, because it takes a different mind to speak about Jordan and Latvia in the context of reform, and I'm delighted that you were able to do so. I promised you that I'm going to say something at the end, which I will. You know, in 1958, General de Gaulle sent his Minister of Culture, who was a man of great literary talent, a great intellectual, called Andre Malraux. And Malraux came and visited Delhi and had two very long conversations with Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. At one point, Malraux says to Panditji, "What has been your greatest difficulty since independence?" And Panditji pauses and says, "Creating a just state by just means, I think." So foremost in his mind was creating a just state with just means. Secondly, and I quote him, perhaps too, creating a secular state in a religious country. And later on, he says something which applies to all of us who like to lead what is generally known as the life examined. Panditji, towards the end of that conversation, says also that to create an egalitarian society in a profoundly caste-ridden society is again one of his challenges. And then he adds this sentence, which I think is as valid today as it was in 1958. India, says Panditji to Malraux, India must struggle against herself. And that sentence, that conversation came back to mind when I was reading the poems of Varun, Stillness, his last published work. And one of these great circumstantial things which happened, one of the last poems there, perhaps the last one, echoes some of what Panditji said. And I quote, "What does it mean to want? Is it a license to go forth, expand, and conquer? Is it a dilution of the core of the essence? Is it an animalism? In breaking the mold, roaming, hungered, hunted, and scared, feverish, not knowing whether the prey lies within." Between Panditji's last sentence, "India must struggle against herself," and Varun's, "not knowing whether the prey lies within," these are dissonances I found. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll just allow us a minute because we have still to give a vote of thanks. Just allow us a moment, please. Many, many thanks. So if you could please stay seated for another minute. Many thanks. I think we all should give a huge thanks to Honorable MP and to do that, may I trouble President PIC Dr. Mashalkar to please come on stage and present a copy of a book, because that's the best gift that we have, and that's on Tilak, and that's edited by these two gentlemen that you can see on the stage along with the MP. Thank you so much. Huge thanks for those on the dais and everyone else, and we conclude the program. Thank you.